I'm Dr. David Inouye, a retired university professor from the University of Maryland's Department of Biology. For 46 years, I've worked at the Rocky Mountain Biological Laboratory, a high-altitude research facility in the Colorado Rocky Mountains at 2,900 meters. I've seen a lot of evidence of climate change during my time working there. For instance, the amount of snow that we're getting is declining. This graph shows for two different periods during the time I've worked there that initially the amount of snow we were getting each winter was increasing, but about the late 1990s that changed and we're now receiving less snow, and it looks like that trend is going to continue. The ratio of snow to rain is also changing. We're getting more of our annual precipitation in this area as rain and less as snow. That, of course, is of great concern to the ski areas in Colorado because they depend on that snowpack for their business. It also means that the snow that used to store water until late in the summer, which would then be released for agriculture, for recreation, is disappearing earlier than it used to. That's also of great concern to many people in the Rocky Mountains. The snow is also melting earlier than it used to. This graph shows two different time periods during the 46 years when I've worked out there, and you can see that snow is melting earlier than it used to. That means that the growing season is getting longer, but it also means that we're seeing more evidence of climate change because of the effects of frost. This graph shows the mean minimum April temperature, and you can see how much warmer springs are now than they used to be. That's also causing the snow to melt earlier than it used to. And a final factor, potentially also related to climate change in why the snow is melting earlier, is the fact that we're getting more dust storms during the winter. Here's a picture showing the mountains outside Crested Butte, Colorado. You can see some fresh white snow on the tops of the peaks, but underneath that is a layer of dust on snow, and that will of course change the albedo of the snowpack, causing snow to melt a couple of weeks earlier than it would otherwise have melted. I do a lot of work with wildflowers, and here's a picture of a meadow at the base of Gothic Mountain near the Rocky Mountain Biological Lab in about the middle of July, showing this meadow full of aspen sunflowers, Helianthella quinquenervis. When we have an early snow melt and the plants start growing early, they're much more likely to be affected by late frost. We can often have a frost about as late as the 10th of June. And here you can see the same meadow in a year with complete frost kill of the aspen sunflowers. So this can have dramatic consequences for the plants and for the animals that depend on those wildflowers, including pollinators, including seed predators, and other herbivores. This kind of false spring, in which we have an early warm spell followed by a late hard frost, is also affecting agriculture, not only in the Colorado Rocky Mountains, but around the world. But here you can see a sign at the farmer's market in Denver where the farmers are apologizing for the high price of peaches, but they lost 70% of their peaches that year due to a late frost. I also work with pollinators, including bumblebees, and we have data that show that bumblebees are moving up in altitude, one of the consequences that's been predicted for climate change, that animals are going to move up in altitude to remain within their comfort zones. Animals are also migrating earlier. You can see that robins are now arriving at this site at the Rocky Mountain Biological Lab weeks earlier than they used to back in the 1980s. Animals that hibernate, including marmots, are emerging weeks earlier than they used to as the springs are warmer. We're also seeing evidence of other animals moving up in altitude, like this Wyoming ground squirrel, which we never used to have up at this altitude of the biological lab. Foxes have been moving up, and they now overwinter at this altitude of 2,900 meters. We've also had, in the last few years, a moose overwintering at that altitude. There are mosquito species, new species moving up in altitude, including one species that's a carrier of West Nile virus. And we're also in the streams seeing evidence of things like blooms of Didymosphenia. So these wildflower meadows, which give the town of Crested Butte, Colorado, its title of the wildflower capital of Colorado, are changing rather rapidly due to climate change. And not all of these changes are going to be favoring these wildflower meadows. We are predicting that within maybe 50 years, many of these wildflower meadows are going to become sagebrush meadows as the warmer, drier temperatures favor sagebrush over those wildflowers. So we're hoping that the planet's inhabitants can start to do something about this changing climate, because I think in many regards people are going to be unhappy with the changes that are being wrought by the increased greenhouse gases in the atmosphere and the consequences that that has.